Varnishing an oil painting is so satisfying. Both visually, but if you're the creator, it pens the epilogue of the creation. But honestly, it is also slightly stressful, especially if you're unsure of the chemistry or the process. So let's try to alleviate that stress. Varnish protects the paint film from the elements, such as dirt, dust, and debris, while also evening out the painting's final appearance, saturating colors and values. Good idea, Scully. In this video, we will discuss and demonstrate the application of traditional resins such as Damar, modern solvent-based acrylic final varnishes, temporary varnishes and mediums, both final and temporary spray varnishes, and how we use solvents to clean, prep, thin, mix, and remove varnishes. Let's begin with brushes. Liquid varnishes need to be applied very smoothly and evenly. A chip brush is a natural coarse hair disposable brush, which is meant for the applications of solvent, resins, and varnishes. Now I might push too hard, but in my experience the occasional hair breaks off and lands in my varnish. They are just too coarse and rough for any smooth application. Off you go! Oh no, good reflexes, I'm so sorry. Foam brushes are slightly better. However, used incorrectly, they can create air bubbles from the friction caused by their uneven surface. Also, depending on the solvent and resin you use, they could dissolve or swell up. So, see ya!
Scully, calm down. You are overreacting. Hey, did an inferior brush strike the ideal?
Come on, I am so sorry.
Michael, none of those brushes you're introducing meet any kind of Academy approval. To apply the varnish properly, you need a brush crafted from the fallen tail hairs of the pastes.
I don't think I'll be finding that anytime soon. But what is easy to find is our dedicated oil painting brushes. Because of how hard it is to clean varnish out of the hairs of the brush, I do not recommend using your dedicated oil painting brushes. Larger, house painting brushes, while great for gesso, are just too coarse and firm to apply varnish, and could again scratch the quickly drying surface. The best brush I've used is a nylon synthetic larger watercolor brush, preferably 1.5 to 2 inches. It is soft enough to smoothly apply the varnish, yet firm enough for an even application. Knowing that a dedicated varnish brush only lasts several applications, I recommend buying a cheaper brush. Right again, Scully, it's so important. Varnishes, being either resin, petroleum, or solvent-based, are very harsh on our system. During the application of the varnish, we need to protect ourselves, starting with our skin. I recommend wearing either vinyl or latex gloves. Varnish is very difficult to scrub off our skin. If it lingers there too long, it can irritate and possibly cause a rash. Wearing a dust mask cuts back on the toxic fumes. I would recommend at minimum an N95 mask. Preferably, you'll want to wear a respirator, like this one from 3M. This will dramatically reduce your exposure to the harmful fumes. Finally, I would recommend eye protection from the fumes and the occasional splatter that might occur. Thus, wraparound goggles are best. Far out, Scully, you look ready. Before we apply any varnish, we need to clean our fully dried oil paintings. On average, an oil painting fully dries in 6 to 12 months. One way to check is to lightly press in some of the thickest paint of the painting. If it is rigid and hard, the painting is dry. To clean the surface, we will need some artist-grade odorless mineral spirits, a few clean, lint-free cotton rags, and our protective gloves. A small amount of odorless mineral spirit goes a long way. Lightly wipe down the painted surface. Any dirt and dust will be easily removed, but do not over-scrub or press too hard. That will possibly lift up your dried color. Lightly wipe off all the remaining mineral spirit with a clean rag. It always surprises me how dirty a painting can get during that year or more while drying. Let the remaining terp evaporate off the surface for at least an hour or so. Then it's time for our final varnish. Remember, a final varnish should only be applied to a fully dried oil painting. If you apply the final varnish too soon, you run the risk of cracking the oil paint. Simply, varnish dries quickly and oil paint dries slow. First up are the synthetic resin varnishes. Modern acrylic-based resins are very robust, scratch-resistant, and durable, which makes them very desirable, in addition to them being removable, and they discolor very minimally over time. To varnish this painting, I will be using an MSA varnish, or a mineral spirit acrylic varnish. Depending on the brand, they usually come in 3 different sheens: gloss, satin, and matte finishes. The different sheens affect the color and light reflection differently, but really it comes down to your preferred preference. A few years ago, a matte sheen was my go-to finish. And right now, I think I want to cover everything with gloss. Everything. A gloss varnish has the most surface reflection and glare, but it also creates the most color and value saturation, resulting in deep and beautiful colors. Again, to apply the varnish, I will use a 1.5-inch nylon watercolor wash brush. Alright, cool, now it's time to apply the varnish. First, lie the painting flat. Most important while applying the varnish is to apply it thinly and evenly. In one quick session, apply the varnish to the whole surface and the sides, so it will entirely dry to an even, uniform, durable film. I like to transfer my varnish into a glass container, so that I can dip my brush in the varnish. That way I have much more control over the amount of varnish that I'm placing on the painting. Remember, always varnish in well-ventilated spaces, wearing the proper PPE. Preferably, I like to varnish near an open window. The glare of the daylight dancing across the paint helps me see what has and has not been properly varnished. When the whole surface is covered with an empty brush and long strokes, recover the entire surface, evening out any high spots or empty area. And let's stop it right there. Right after I recorded this scene, I realized that I demonstrated varnishing a bit too casually. Starting varnishing in the middle of the painting is fine for smaller works and especially for slow drying varnishes. However, it's a much better habit to always start on one end of the painting and work your way slowly to the other end. Thus, if the initial varnish starts to dry on you, you don't overbrush and possibly scratch the varnish. And always on larger paintings, I start on one end of the canvas and evenly apply the varnish toward the other end. It's also good practice to varnish a test painting before you varnish a painting you really care about, getting used to the varnish, how it applies and how it dries. Now back to our regularly scheduled programming. Immediately after varnishing, clean your brush with odorless mineral spirits. Sometimes the varnish is stubborn, so you might have to soak the brush for a short period of time. Once clean, then rinse with soap and water. Let the varnish dry for 24 hours before handling the painting. If need be, you can apply a second coat of varnish to fix any open or uneven areas in the first coat. Jumping to the other side of the sheen spectrum, a matte varnish has little to no reflection or glare. However, the colors appear duller, compressing the tonal range ever so slightly. Matte varnishes typically separate, so they will have to be mixed. Stir, but do not shake. Sorry, Mr. Bond, but we don't want bubbles in our varnish. Before applying a matte MSA varnish, apply a first coat of a gloss MSA varnish. The gloss coat will even the tones and create rich, saturated colors. That will help prevent the compression of the tonal range after the matte coat, because the matte slightly darkens the lights and brightens the darks. Apply the varnish just like we did before, thinly and evenly. If you apply too much varnish in any one area, wipe it up with an empty brush or use a lint-free rag. Once dry, then apply the matte top second coat, the same way that we did the last couple coats, thinly and evenly, making sure to cover the whole surface. And just like before, long cross-canvas sweeps with an empty brush to finish and even out the surface before allowing to dry. It is really quite the pleasure to see the varnish resaturate your once dull colors back to life. Depending on the brand of varnish, some MSA varnishes like the ones from Golden need to be thin to correctly apply. This Golden MSA Satin Sheen recommends a 3:1 varnish to turpentine ratio to be properly thin for application. When thinning varnishes, please use a pure gum, rectified, or distilled turpentine. Later, when explaining Damar varnishes, I'll go into further detail why. Always label your mixes. Now let's discuss and demonstrate how to remove a mineral solvent acrylic varnish. Not all varnishes are removable, but most MSA varnishes are. A definite benefit of using a modern varnish. Varnishes, being the outer protective coat, do get dirtied, damaged, chipped, and scratched throughout their life. Using an odorless mineral spirit or a distilled turpentine, again, on a lint-free cotton rag, with small, circular motions of light to medium pressure, will begin to dissolve the removable MSA varnish. Make sure to test out the procedure close to a corner and edge. You don't want to ruin the center of an oil painting. Once confirmed, begin to slowly remove the picture varnish. Again, go slow. Yes, the process is time consuming and you have to be deliberate. If you have trouble seeing, remember, open up a window so you can illuminate the removal process. Once the varnish is removed in an area, you will see the flat, dull, dry color underneath. Do not push too hard or stay in one area too long, or you'll start to remove the original color. So be light and consistent throughout. Once the varnish is fully removed, let dry for at least an hour or so before reapplying a new coat of varnish. For me, it's back to gloss. And yep, you guessed it, same procedure as before. Remember, you can add a second coat after 24 hours to even out any of the imperfections from the first coat. Do not forget to immediately clean your brush right after the varnish process. I have ruined so many brushes just leaving them out for a few minutes. Now let's hop over to natural varnishes. Discovered in the Middle Ages, natural resin varnishes, which are derived from plants, fossils, and insects, are traditionally used to create the tough, resilient, protective outer coat for an oil painting, while magically creating an internal glow. Also tend to discolor, darken, and crack with age. Artists' natural resin varnishes are defined in two categories: hard resins like copal and amber that must be dissolved in a heated oil, and soft resins like damar and mastic that can be dissolved in a cold spirit. The classical lore of amber varnish was popularized by the old Baroque European masters such as Artemisia Gentileschi. Amber resin is the most rare, and it's the most expensive. Damar varnish is the most common natural resin varnish, also being the cheapest. Damar is made from the resin from the Dipterocarpaceae. I'll get it. The Dipterocarpaceae. Ah, it's close enough. That family. They're a bunch of tropical rainforest trees. Moving on. Let's get to the point. Yes, please. Please do. Hey, I thought you were gonna help me. All right, I get it. Let's go over the application of damar varnish without them. Again, damar being a soft resin is dissolved by cold spirits. Thus, if it sits too long, it'll start to recrystallize. So before application, we will need to again dissolve those crystals by warming in some water, hot to the touch, but remember, do not boil. We do not want to overheat the turpentine in the solution. When the water is warm, pour it into a heat-safe container. Then submerge the glass container of damar. You want the height of the water to be about the height of the varnish. Warm until the crystals dissolve. That usually takes about 10 minutes. The warming process also thins the viscosity of the varnish, allowing for an easier application. Damar varnish dries slower than modern synthetics, so you'll got a bit more time to apply. But still, do not overbrush once it starts to become tacky. Damar, while stunningly beautiful, is somewhat brittle. So I only like to apply it on more rigid panels, but there is nothing like the glow of a damar varnish. Before an oil painting is fully dried, but it is dried to the touch, we can use a temporary varnish to create even sheens that resaturate colors, values, and give a level of protection without cracking the continually drying paint. A retouch varnish is one of the most traditional temporary varnishes. Retouch varnish is dissolved damar resin in a solution of 3:1 of turpentine to varnish. The thinner application of damar reduces the possible cracking and discoloring. When thinning a natural soft resin to make varnish, retouch varnish, and any oil varnish-based medium, use a pure gum, distilled, or rectified turpentine, and do not use an odorless mineral spirit. Most odorless mineral spirits, aka a white spirit, are made from petroleum distillates, which are good for cleaning your brush and creating a slightly healthier environment. They are not good for thinning natural resins. Meanwhile, turpentine is made from natural resins extracted from trees. Thus, it has an immediate synergy with other tree-based resins, such as damar. The application of the retouch varnish is just like the applied varnishes from earlier, and it takes a few days to dry to the touch. Sometimes the retouch varnish can bead up when you apply it. That's caused by a surface tension. Simply oil the canvas to break the tension and then reapply the retouch varnish. A traditional oil paint medium is used to extend the color, create consistent sheens, transparent glazing, and also as a temporary varnish. It's composed of 1 part an artist oil, 1 part a pure gum or rectified turpentine, and 1 part a Damar varnish. Thus, it can immediately break any surface tension on your canvas or panel. Apply it the same way as before, nice and thin and even. However, because of the additional artist's oil, it takes longer to dry to the touch. Recharging your dry painted surface with a retouch varnish or oil medium resaturates your colors and values to help assess current conditions or to revitalize for a truer photograph or while your artwork is on display until it is fully dried to accept a final varnish. Modern oil mediums, such as Gamblin's Galkid and Winsor Newton's Liquin, perform the same function as a traditional oil medium. However, they both dry much faster, and Winsor Newton's Liquin is a satin sheen. Liquin is my current go-to painting medium and temporary varnish. And then there's Gamblin's Picture Varnish, GamVar. Developed with the National Gallery of Art, GamVar is a final picture varnish that can be applied when the painting is just dry to the touch, a revelation for oil painters. So we don't have to wait the usual required 6 to 12 months. Gamblin's formula is permeable enough to allow for the oil to continue its drying process and off-gassing. However, thicker paintings should still wait a few months before applying. This product must be applied very thinly or remain sticky for days. Honestly, it works great for my thinner paintings, but not my thicker works. It's just too watery and tends to run down larger areas and pool up. Because of that, for my thicker paintings, I tend to go with a more viscous Liquitex Soluvar, which is a great varnish. Finally, there are spray varnishes. Depending on the brands, the lineup includes final to temporary varnishes in addition to classic Damar and modern synthetic resins. Thus, you can find all different types of sheens from matte finish to gloss finish. Spray varnishes do not create a super heavy, even coat, which allows them to be applied a little bit earlier in the drying process because they leave a bit more of a permeable surface for, again, the oil painting to continue its drying. Before spraying, make sure you shake the can vigorously for at least a solid minute or until properly mixed. Hold the can back at least 12 to 14 inches, and then spray in overlapping horizontal complete paths from left to right, making sure you spray off the edges to avoid any buildup. Then simply repeat with vertical overlapping complete paths from top to bottom. Multiple light coats are way better and more even than one heavy coat. It is best to spray outdoors, without any wind. I know, the world of varnish feels as vast as art itself. So many choices, materials, and procedures. Remember, a lot of it just comes down to personal preferences, so experiment. Some artists only believe in the traditional approaches, while others only trust the latest synthetic, while some skip the whole process altogether. Anyway, don't get caught up in the nuances of particulars. Always just focus on making great artwork. At the end of the day, materials are just tools. And I would wager, if you make a great artwork, someone will figure out how to save it. Until next time, thanks for watching.
Sigh. Michael, you were starting to illuminate the truth, however you finished too cavalier and modern. The Academy just notified me they revoked your certificate for this new video. As well as I've told you many times, the Academy is the one that regulates greatness. Traditional materials and processes are given out to achieve the greatness. Not just tools, but they are the path to oneness and synergy with all things. One word, Michael. Alchemy. No, excuse me. Kansas's wayward sun is about to drop. Toodles. If you don't leave, I will call the Academy on you too.